Hi, I'm Steelfur, aka Finbar of Steelfur Speaks. When I did that last video about classes, a lot of people said, hey, when's that talent video coming? So hey, this is it. Now I want to start off just by talking about talents a little bit. I'm going to explain why it's a lot harder to do a which talent should you play video compared to a which class should you play video. Mostly because we have classes independent of talents, but we have very few cards that are talented but independent of the classes that they're played. Now you might be thinking, hey, I've seen loads of Earth X cards, Shadow X cards. You have, but those typically come in a set or a package with and based around the classes that are currently available to use that talent, which does make things a bit different. But let's dive in first to those of you who are wondering, hey, I'm new to Flesh and Blood, what is a talent? So the first thing to note is that talent is, much like a class, an archetype in the game of Flesh and Blood, and some examples of talents could be Shadow, Light, Draconic. You'll see on the right hand side we've got Subaltern, Breaker of Dawn, a light warrior hero. So the first thing to note, of course, is that Light groups certain light cards and makes them available across classes to classes that have that ability. And there is a kind of archetypal promise there, which is that all heroes of the same talent should have access to a similar core effect, ability, or differentiating mechanic that makes those cards similar between those classes. And that means that if we get, say, a light ninja in the future, much like Bolton and Prism, which we'll get into later, can build and spend their soul, that light ninja should also be about building and spending souls. And when we break down all the talents, you'll see how, if they introduce a new hero, how we can expect that to play out within the remit of that talent. It is worth noting, and I kind of hinted this in the intro, is that talents affect heroes much more than, talents affect classes and heroes much more than heroes affect talents. What do I mean by that? I mean that if they are printing a talent which lines up with certain classes, that talent is going to make the class play much drastically different, whereas the same effect in the talent might just be kind of generic. And what do I mean by that? I mean, if you have just a light card, for example, it might just be a 0 for 4 that says when this hits, it goes into your soul. And if you have a warrior card, that's obviously there focused on dealing with weapons. Once you add light and warrior to the mix, suddenly you get a complicated and complex effect. So talent effects are more generic. They are supposed to fit into a wide variety of heroes, so they're not as applicable to, complex effects. And then class cards, however, by themselves can be more complex. But then you get the combination of the two, which leads to much more complex effects. So what I also mean is that while we can sort of infer as to how the talents play now, if they printed a hero that used these talents differently, that would drastically affect how we perceive the talent. For example, we'll talk about this more when we talk about Shadow and Vinset, because Vinset keeps with the Shadow theme of playing from the Banished Zone, but does so in a much more drastic way compared to the way that Chain did it, compared to the way that Levia interacts with the Banished Zone. So what I mean by that is when they release a new hero, that hero is going to be drastically deciding what that hero is going to do more necessarily than the talent that affects them, which means I think we will see increased variation in talents and how talents are used as these heroes come out. Right? So keep that in mind as we talk about them. It is worth noting that talents are a balancing tool, much in the same way that classes are. But what talents allow you to do is silo powerful effects from different heroes within the same class. So you might have a very powerful warrior effect that would be really good in Bolton, and you might have that effect, and you might think, hey, this effect is really good in Dorinthia. By making a light warrior card rather than just a warrior card, you neatly silo that effect away from Dorinthia while giving Bolton free access to that card and not giving access to that card to any other light heroes. So you create a two-tier balancing system where you basically have three pools. You have the talent pool, you have the class plus talent pool, and you have the class pool. And in each of those pools, you can put different cards that need to be kept apart from each other, and that way deliver a much more balanced game. There is a promise inherent in the archetypal design of Flesh and Blood, which is that cards from the same talent should be relevant to other heroes within the same talent in the future. But that is a bit less strong than with classes. So light cards and things like that will change drastically. Then, as I said before, there might be a new reinterpretation of what that talent means. The new Prism, for example, spends soul and generates soul in a much different way compared to her previous iteration, and arguably needs less soul than her previous iteration does, or did, because her previous one needed, say, 1 soul a turn to make a spectral shield, whereas the new one only needs soul a specific number of times per game. So what that means is that a card that might be relevant for that very soul-hungry previous Prism might not be as relevant to others in the future. But in many ways, it does interact the same way that that classes do. There is a little bit of a promise that if you have a light legendary, that it will be relevant for other light classes, other light heroes in the future. So, you know, Flesh and Blood likes to keep those cards relevant for people who have purchased them when they come back to playing with that talent again. And when we get the new Draconic talent that comes out in Hunted, I fully expect cards like Flamescale Furnace, some of the existing weapons and things like that, existing cards for Draconic, are going to be useful in other Draconic heroes in the future. The other thing that talents do, which is very interesting, is that they add an extra dimension on top of fantasy and theme that classes can't do by themselves. So you've got classes and they do a really good job of representing the theme of a character. So, you know, Dorinthia is a warrior. She has a sword. She focuses on weapon attacks. You've got your brutes who focus on smashing people with their clubs and big hammers. And then you've got the guardians who also focus on big hammers and protection and defense. And that's one element of building a fantasy theme. But what powers their magic and where that comes from is the other side of building a theme of a fantasy and class. So more than classes in some ways, talents actually drastically alter the visual effects of classes, and you can see the difference. It's less distinct between Bolton and Dorinthia, but you can see the difference, say, between the Rune Blades, whereas your traditional Rune Blade, their magical signature is purple. They use, you know, darkness and shadows and demonastery themed stuff. And then you have the Earth Rune Blades and the Lightning Rune Blades who use lightning and zap and leaves and all those kind of aesthetics, and it's green and it's evoking nature. So very much like Flesh and Blood uses the combination of class and talent to evoke certain themes and fantasy archetypes without actually having to add those classes to the game and disrupting balance. And I've given some examples here, but what you can see what I mean by that is light plus warrior equals paladin. Earth plus wizard equals druid. Now, you could go and print a separate paladin or druid class, but that would quickly lead to mechanic bloat in the game. So it does seem that what Flesh and Blood is doing consistently is providing these combinations of talent plus class to give people traditional fantasy archetypes without having to dilute and expand their class pool too much or make it unsustainable for design. So the options for talents, and first thing you'll notice is there are a lot less on here than there are for classes as well. There is the 5 main talents, Draconic, Elemental, Light, Mystic, and Shadow. There is also the Royal talent, which is kind of pending in Classic Constructed. There is a card that gives the talent. There is a royal hero in Blitz, but in Classic Constructed, it's pending. And Elemental is also subdivided into Earth, Ice, and Lightning. Elemental is a bit of a weird talent because Elemental is the overarching talent, and heroes will have an essence of either Earth, Ice, or Lightning, which tells them they can play Elemental cards, Earth cards, and their class cards. But there are also overarching generic Elemental cards, though it is arguable that that is a legacy piece of design, because in Tales of Aria that was the case, and in the latest release of Rosetta, which is also an Elemental set, there were very few, I think if none, no actual elemental cards. Every single card was given a talent rather than being an overarching card available to all the elemental heroes. So elemental might be shelved. We might just be into the actual talent keywords now, but it did exist as a talent. It is worth acknowledging. If you open up a box of Tales of Aria, you will find elemental, and also elemental is what is written on the heroes, even in Rosetta, right? They are elemental heroes with the essence that they're supposed to represent. Okay. It's worth just noting on the right hand side we have the non-talented heroes, so you can kind of see the difference between Bolton and these. So Bolton will have light warrior, and these have the non-talented versions, so you can see this is what a hero looks like when it's normal. The border they have on the card is the border of the location the hero is from, which in this case is Solana for Dorinthia and the pits for Arachne and Riptide, whereas talented heroes often have the border of the talent. Bolton also happens to be from Solana, so he kind of has the border twice, but other heroes will have the talent that matches their, well, they'll have the border that matches their talent. So how to choose a talent, and I'm going to get in and break down what I mean by this on the next slide, but for the moment you just have to think the main challenge when I'm describing these talents to you is that the majority of talent and class combinations do not exist yet. There are very specific class and talent combinations in the game, which means you might hear me in this video talking about Draconic, and you might be a Guardian player and you might think, damn, I'd really love to play a Draconic Guardian, and I'm going to tell you that that's not possible, right? So for that reason, you know, if you really, really vibe with a talent, you should probably just play that talent and see what heroes come up in that talent. So I, for example, really like the Earth talent for the art and the nature themes. So my stable of heroes at the moment is Wizard with Verdance. It's Florian with Runeblade, and soon it's going to be Jarl, and I've also got Terra in Blitz, and I have Oldhim and Briar in Living Legend. So I have a few different heroes that are Earth heroes that I can play if I'm committed to playing that Earth aesthetic. As with the classes, I would say, you know, play the one you like, not the one that's meta. You know, if you're a meta player, if you're a meta chaser, you should probably do that. But if you're just here to have a good time, you will find that playing cards that resonate with you, where the art resonates and you really like the theme, really matters. And I'll tell you, you know, if the theme of a talented hero doesn't line up for you, you're going to be looking at those cards a lot. So, you know, you're not going to like it if you don't enjoy playing with the playstyle, or if you don't enjoy the art. So reasons to choose a talent, you know, the art obviously is huge. Talent has a massive impact on how a hero looks, and you'll see some of the heroes that are picked out to show you in the talent sections are massively impacted by their art, and you're going to be looking at that hero card every time. There is specific playstyle patterns that match each talent. There are certain core mechanics that are shared across heroes of each talent, as well as kind of a lore and background feeling. Some talents are also just by their very nature cheaper. If you think about the Shadow talent, for example, it comes in at a baseline cheaper because most of the competitive heroes aren't playing Shadow, even though Vincent is good now. So, you know, you can find talents that are cheaper to play and talents that are more expensive, like say Earth, where Felling the Crown has just hit £40 a card in the UK based on this video. There is also meta strength to consider. Some talents have proven themselves to be more powerful over time. Specifically, things like Mystic is proving to be quite strong. You know, stuff like Lightning is proving to be quite strong. So you might want to think, hey, it looks like all of the Mystic cards are very strong. Therefore, if I buy them now, whatever Mystic hero they print after this set is probably going to be quite strong as well, because those talent cards are strong. So you kind of do want to think about how much am I paying for these cards and how long are these cards going to be relevant. Whereas in a different class, the strength of the actual talented cards might not be as strong. So investing heavily in, say, Light, for example, might not get you as far as the strength of something like Mystic or Draconic, because you're not necessarily going to find those cards powerful when the next Light hero comes out. So just bear that in mind. So let's just run down quickly what cards, class and talent combinations exist. And first, just get the warning out of the way, because I want this video to be mostly evergreen, and I will update it when they add new talents, but I'm probably not going to update it when they add new class combinations, just because that'll be a bit more frequent. But for now, when I'm doing this video, this is the part that's going to get outdated the quickest, so do go and check it. But the current combinations available. So for Draconic, you have one ninja already, Phi, and another ninja, Syndra, coming in the Hunted. You have the Illusionist, Dromai, who is currently only playable in Living Legend, though there is a lot of speculation that because she's a fan favourite, she has a lot of Marvel cards, there will be a second one coming soon. You also have a Warrior Fang coming soon in Hunted in early 2025. In the Earth, then you have a Guardian, technically two Guardians. You have Oldhim and Jarl. Oldhim is currently in Living Legend. You have a Runeblade, two Runeblades again, technically. One is in Living Legend, one isn't. You have Briar, and you have, who is a Lightning Earth Runeblade, and you have Florian, who is an Earth Runeblade. Wizards, you have Verdance, who's an Earth Wizard. In Ice, you have Guardian, again, Oldhim and Jarl. Oldhim, Living Legend. Jarl is in an upcoming Armory deck. And you have Icelander, who is Living Legend, but is an Ice Wizard. Lightning, you have two Runeblades again. You have Briar, who's an Earth Lightning Runeblade, who's in Living Legend. And you have Aurora, who's legal and was printed in Rosetta. And you have a Wizard, Acilio, also printed in Rosetta. For Light Heroes, you have two versions of Prism. You have Prism, who is printed in Monarch, who is Living Legend. And you have Prism, who is printed in Dust to Dawn, who is still legal. Then you have Bolton in Warrior. In Shadow, you have Brute, and you have Runeblade. Technically, again, two Runeblades. One is Living Legend, one is playable. Chain is Living Legend, Vincent is playable, and you have Levia as your Shadow Brute. In Mystic, you have Ninja, you have Zen, you have Assassin, you have Nu, and Illusionist, you have Enigma. Those were all printed in Part the Mistveil. If you like the Mystic aesthetic and you like any of these classes, getting into Part the Mistveil, really good idea. And then you have the untalented only classes, which did include Warrior until the announcement for the Hunted, but currently only includes Ranger and Mechanologist. Every other hero has at least one class and talent combination. So keep that in mind as we talk through this. Don't get super excited for a class and talent pairing combination. If you've watched my class video, which I do recommend you watch, and then you're watching this one, don't come out of this and think, oh, I'd really love a Lightning Ninja. It could happen in the future. There's really good synergy between Lightning and the Ninja class because they're both focused on Go Again. But it isn't there yet. So just do temper this. Do go and have a look at what has been announced. Depending on when you're watching this, this video was recorded in October 2024, just before the release of Hunted. So if a couple more sets have come out, or you're watching this in 2025, 2026, if I'm lucky, you're still watching this in a couple years' time, or have updated it, then just check what combinations have been made available. Okay. So let's start off with Draconic. So the biggest thing about Draconic is red cards matter. So if you're new to Fab or not new, red is one of the colors of the pitch system. Red cards are more powerful but pitch for less resources. So Draconic as a talent cares about red cards, specifically just pitching them, playing them, synergy. There'll be stuff like if you previously played a red card, get Go Again. Your red cards cost one less. Your red cards deal one damage. Draconic also cares about keyword interaction. So how many Draconic cards you've played, how many Draconic chain links you have for the Ninja, if a card is Draconic is coming up in the new Hunted set. So there's a token called Fealty that makes your next attack Draconic, and then you've got a lot of cards that buff themselves if the card is Draconic. So you've got Draconic synergy, red cards matter synergy. There is also a lot of Go Again and power in that way, because a lot of red cards with Go Again are quite strong, especially on the Ninja side of things. There is a lot of Go Again. On the Illusionist side of things, there was a lot of Go Again for the little dragons as well. And there's a tiny sub-theme of graveyard interaction in terms of burning up your graveyard. So both Phi, who picks up Phoenix Flames from his graveyard and recycles them, and Dromai, who has Burn It All, which burns cards in her graveyard to sustain itself. So there is a light theme of graveyard interaction and graveyard destruction in Draconic as well, because you're burning through all your resources, including the cards in your graveyard. In terms of reasons to play, the big one is just going to be if you like fire, you like that Imperial Asian aesthetic. So most of the Draconic heroes, just based on the lore, are set in Volcor, which is kind of like our Japanese/Chinese imperial empire on the continent of Wraith. So if that is your aesthetic and you like Phoenix and Dragon and you know, imperial artistry and things like that, then Draconic might just be a good fit for you. The other reason mainly is just if you like low resource aggressive gameplay, because obviously if most of your deck contains red cards, and at some points all of the Draconic decks have been entirely red cards, the amount of resources you could generate turn per turn was not that high, which meant you built decks that didn't need huge amounts of resources, right? So if you like not pitching a lot but focusing on just trying to get as much out of the cards you have, then that is the thing for you. And conversely, if you don't like that, then you want a resource heavy strategy, then you need to start looking at classes that do resource heavy strategies like Guardian, and you start looking at Mystic heroes who focus on blues instead of reds, right? So this isn't the reason. You're not going to be flowing resources, you're not going to be able to play or easily necessarily afford all of your CNC play sets and your stuff like that, though to be fair, the Draconic heroes did squeeze CNC and things like that in as well, but you know, the point is you're not going to necessarily be able to play those really big effects where you pitch a load of cards and you get a load of value. That's different. That's for different talent. So the available class combinations at the moment, as I already hit, we have Phi, who's available. He's aggro, red focused, go wide. We have Dromite, the illusionist, and we have Fang and Syndra, who are both unreleased at the moment. So moving forwards, I'm going to talk less about classes now. I just like to use that example, but I think I've already covered it off. So let's just talk about Earth then. So the first thing to notice is that Earth is very much slow, big attacks, and ramp themes. So Earth is not going to be fully powered at the start of the game, and you can see both of the heroes that I'm previewing both say if there are 8 or more, and it's 4 in Blitz, but it's 8 in Classic Constructed, Earth cards in your banished zone, this gets X. What that's telling you is you not only have to block with those Earth cards and play them, but then you have to play other cards that banish them. So it could take you quite a few turns to get these heroes actually online. And before they're online, you don't actually have a hero ability. So if that sounds like it's going to frustrate you and you want a hero ability from turn 1, then Earth heroes aren't for you. If you're like me and you're a green player in Magic and you've come to Flesh and Blood and you enjoy ramp and you enjoy the payoff of building up and turning things on when you kind of get to the point where you're ready to do something big and having that value then come through later on, then Earth might be the thing for you. The other theme of Earth is Arsenal interaction and disruption. Earth has one of the only banned legendaries in the game, which is called Crown of Seeds, and it just let you pay 1 resource to put a card from your arsenal on the bottom of your deck, draw a card, and prevent the next 1 damage that we dealt to you. And that effect in itself was so powerful that they banned a legendary that costs about 50 quid, because it's super powerful to be able to arsenal any card and then get rid of it in exchange for value. And Earth does that to a theme. It has cards that let you get rid of your arsenal and prevent more damage. It has cards that let you get rid of your arsenal and draw a card. It has a lot of value inherent in arsenal cycling, and that is a sub-theme of Earth, as well as the ramping up to power. So reasons to play Earth is if you like to feel more powerful as games continue. If you like that setup and value-based gameplay, you don't mind waiting a bit to get your effects on, and if you enjoy blocking and you enjoy that kind of defensive strategy that leads to value. So Verdance, for example, is going to be trying to set up combos and turns where she deals a lot of damage. Florian's going to be trying to set up turns where he generates loads of rune chants very, very efficiently with his ability on, and then uses those to deal damage. Don't play Earth if you do not like feeling slow. Don't play Earth if you want to be able to use big hands. So Earth heroes are notorious for not necessarily being able to play their hand very well, which means that sometimes when your opponent chooses to set up and do something setup wise, you're going to be looking at 4 cards and thinking, well, I can't play all of these. And you're going to do one thing and end up with a card or 2 wasted in your hand because your opponent didn't attack. So if you don't like that feeling, or if that's really going to annoy you and you're like, look, if my opponent doesn't do anything, then I need to be going hard and throwing everything I've got at them, then yeah, don't play Earth, play Lightning or something else. Moving on to Ice. So Ice is our control hero and our control effect, and one of the few sort of fully control-based heroes in Flesh and Blood. Both ice heroes revolve around creating frostbite tokens. Frostbite's a very simple token. It just says your opponent's next action costs 1 more, and then destroy this once they've paid that cost. So you know, something that's 3 would cost 4, and then the frostbite would go away. So the gameplay style then is disruption, delay, and taxation. Frostbite's tax. There's cards like Blizzard that take away go again unless they pay you resources. There's cards that stop go again, remove card draw, remove card searching, all those kind of things. So disrupt, delay, and then tax with Frostbite. Control your opponent's turns. Use efficient timing to control their resources at the right time, disrupt them with instants and stuff at just the right moment, make them play suboptimally and punish their mistakes quite heavily. It's one of the reasons people liked playing Icelander, who's one of the ice heroes. Now, it is worth noting that Icelander is living legend, and Jarl Vitrethi, who is a guardian, is probably not going to be able to create frostbites at instant speed as often as Icelander, though there are some instant ice cards that he will be able to play to trigger frostbite tokens on his opponent's turn. It's not going to be the same as Icelander, who basically could play any blue from her arsenal as an instant, so she could do it consistently every turn, but Jarl can do it with cards like Blizzard that are an instant. He can play those out and make a frostbite on his opponent's turn. So reasons then to play ice heroes is you want to be actively engaged in disrupting your opponent's turns. You want to, you know, think, oh, if I play this Blizzard as an instant now, I can do this to my opponent and throw off their game plan. You want to plan out your disruption and then see the payoff, and you enjoy that setup and payoff gameplay. So you enjoy the idea that you're going to arsenal a certain piece of disruption, keep it there for a few turns, and then when you think your opponent is winding up for just the right attack, that's when you're going to play it and spring it on them, and then they're going to be like, damn, okay, if you hadn't done that, I was going to do X to you, and you're just sitting there with a grin on your face being like, yeah, but I thought you were building up to X, so I put this in my arsenal specifically and waited for you to do it, and your opponent's getting salty, and you're like, look how evil anime villain I am. So that's a reason to play ice, is you want to build that disruption and see the payoff. The main reason not to play it is that you don't want to be thinking about that, right? Ice heroes necessarily have to be thinking about their opponent's play patterns. They have to be thinking about what their opponent's going to try and do. They have to be thinking about whether their disruption is going to be enough, whether that's going to deliver the payout that they need. And if you don't want to think about that, if you want to instead be thinking about your own strategy and advancing that strategy, then don't play ice. Play lightning, and that's a really good segue into the next of the elemental heroes. Lightning is about setting up into explosive turns. It's about, you know, not just go again in the way that we saw when we talked about Ninja, not just about going again and again and again. It's about setting up so that you can do turns that are even better than that. So what I mean is, a lot of lightning heroes play around with embodiments of lightning. That is just an aura that stays in play and gives your next attack go again. So you'll see Aurora. Aurora makes one if you've played a lightning card. You're going to leave that on the board, and you're going to finish your turn with a card in arsenal. You're going to draw your 4 cards, and then you're going to use that lightning token to give go again to something that without go again isn't high value, and with go again is crazy value. So something like Gone in a Flash, for example, which you can return to your hand by playing an instant, and if you give it go again at the first instance, and then you play it again and return it to your hand twice and then arsenal again, you're starting to see the sort of value that lightning heroes can deliver. You're going to use that go again to deal large amounts of damage, whether it's through attacks with Aurora or through Arcane with Auxilio. But really what you're looking for are these perfect sort of combo turns where you're triggering instants and you're using your lightning effects and you're setting up just right to deal crazy amounts of damage to your opponent. And there's lots of different synergies and layers within that that can let you set up turns that do intense amounts of damage, and your opponent might not even necessarily be able to block them completely. But it's not always so straightforward. The consistency isn't entirely there. And it is worth noting that one of the reasons to play it is you want to play a layered, aggro, aggressive approach that isn't as straightforward as ninjas who just lay their cards on the table and go again. Now, I know there is some complexity to some ninjas, but my point is that's more straightforward than this. If you want to play that and play that play style, and you want to feel that payoff for setup and proper sequencing, then these are really good talents for you. But on the flip side of that, if you're going to get frustrated when you don't use your cards perfectly and when you leave damage on the table and you're not willing to invest the time to learn how to get every ounce of damage out, because these heroes really work when you're using them to get literally every single ounce of damage out, or if you want to block and feel defensive, both of these heroes have a lot of instants. They have a lot of cards that don't block. They have cards with 0 block or 2 block. They don't block very, very well. And you could be in a situation where you have a handful of no block cards and your opponent presents 16 damage and you lose the game. So it is just worth noting. They can also like whiff. They can also just not work the way they should because you didn't draw the right combination of cards. Now, against a slower deck, you can set that up. And at the World Championships in 2024, we saw examples of that where against really slow decks, Aurora players set up really late until they had like 10 cards left in their deck, but then were sequencing some crazy perfect turns with just the right cards in them to deal as much damage as possible and try and get over the line. So if you want to play into that, then it's really good, but you also have to accept that if you're playing aggro and you want it to just be I can attack every turn and be the aggressive player, this may not be the talent for you. But if you want to play an aggro deck that rewards you for not just being aggressive but also being planning, strategic, then this could be a good talent for you. Moving on from light to lightning, other way around, from lightning to light. So light is interesting because it's one of the earliest talents in Flesh and Blood. In fact, I think it is the first talent in Flesh and Blood that was ever released. So the Monarch set came out, we got talents for the first time, and we were really excited because it kind of brought this new balance element to the game and gave us brand new ways of interacting with cards. Light, but they do suffer a little bit from having a very broad identity compared to the newer talents, and kind of like less synergy sometimes, or less like clear synergy across the talent compared to newer cards, right? So what I mean by that is a light card, it might just be like 0 for 3 if it hits go to your soul, or give a light card +3, or you know, something like that. If you attacking a shadow character, get +X. Whereas I feel like now you see a mystic only card is going to be a lot more synergistic with other mystic only cards, like for example the mystic only attacks that can give go again to a mystic attack, and then if you've played a blue card it gets +2. So if you play 2 of them you might get go again +2 and draw a card when you play it. Like, so I think there's less synergy in light itself, which is kind of reflected as well in the fact that a lot of the light heroes focus on playing their own class cards, the warrior and the illusionist cards, and they focus on playing the light warrior, light illusionist cards, kind of less than just playing the generic light cards, right? So when a light card does actually make it in, it is quite interesting, and it is usually the powerful majestics or 1 or 2 of the commons that make it in, whereas I feel like newer heroes are much more likely to lean into their talent but not class cards to draw those effects. But enough talk about theoretical design. Let's talk actually about the light talent. Light itself is a builder and spender talent. So you're going to spend the game mostly through on-hit effects or charging, which is just an ability that lets you put a card into your soul. You're going to take cards and put them into your soul, which is just a separate banished zone under your hero, or a lot of people put it next to their hero on the playmat, and that's fine as well, as long as your opponent knows where it is and it's clearly visible how many cards you've got there. And then once you've done that, cards in your soul don't necessarily do anything by themselves, but you're going to spend cards from your soul and just put them in the banished zone instead of your soul, and get powerful effects. So for Bolton, that's target attack with greater than its base power, it gains go again. For Awakener of Soul, it's to awaken angels that you have, which are 0, which are 4 power angels with ward 4 that you can attack with. So there's kind of different ways of spending your soul, and Bolton's going to spend it mostly to give himself go again or to buff his attacks. And Prism is going to spend it to build her auras and build a gameplay board. So there's not really a unifying theme in terms of both of the heroes do something similar with their soul. The unifying theme is just the fact this soul exists. So what that actually means is that light is kind of a more flexible talent than others, really, because it just depends on how your soul is being spent. And even old Prism compared to new Prism spends their soul very, very differently. Old Prism was more about spending the soul to use her hero ability to make shields, Whereas New Prism is about spending that soul to first awaken and then attack with the angel cards, right? So slightly different, and it's the same with Boltyn. Reasons to play, kind of like Earth, it is worth just noting you don't mind having weaker turns if they're leading somewhere. So an example for Boltyn is you might block with 2 cards, play a card, charge a card to your soul, and you've only really presented 3 or 4 damage that turn, but you've put a card in your soul, and that's going to be important later on, right? And the same with Prism. Like, you're going to swing with a Herald, it's going to hit, you're going to go and get a Figment, which can turn into an angel, but you might not awaken that angel right now. You might build up your soul a little bit more, give yourself a little bit more gas, so that when you do start to turn cards over and spend your soul, you're using it to maximum effect. And that's kind of the general theme, is I'm going to build my soul and then I'm going to spend it for either a big combo turn with Boltyn or to get my angels online and do specific things. So you shouldn't play light heroes if you're frustrated at some hands being underwhelming, if you're frustrated at the idea that you have to build something to get a result, kind of similar with Earth. And also if you dislike relying on synergy and combo, just the very nature of builder and spender means it's better to be spending resources for maximum effect, and that means it's better to spend those resources on the same turn or to achieve a specific combo goal. So both heroes do kind of rely on a big combo payout or getting to a point where spending that soul is actually worth it for the final effect, which means that you're going to be doing a lot of underwhelming turns, a lot of low power turns, where you're trying to build up to a turn that is worth spending soul on. And also, you know, soul is quite easy to deny. You know, soul is based around blocking. So if you get frustrated at not being able to get soul, you might still win the game, but you might not end the game with a high soul count. And it's just worth being aware that, you know, that could be quite frustrating. So if you don't like being disrupted in that way, might not be the class for you. All right, Shadow. We're almost getting to the end of my list. In fact, I think we are almost at the end of my list. There's just Mystic after this. But Shadow is about the Banished Zone. So whereas Light was about the soul, Shadow is about the Banished Zone. Much like Light, they both come out in the same set. Shadow uses the Banished Zone in a wild variety of ways. It's very broad talent. Levia, for example, doesn't really play cards out of the Banished Zone that often. There are 1 or 2 cards that can do that. She cares more about just controlling how much is in her Banished Zone, controlling when things go into her Banished Zone, and turning off Blood Debt. Blood Debt is an ability on Shadow cards that just says when this is in your Banished Zone, you lose 1 life at the end of your turn. So it's just a punishment for the fact that Shadow heroes can play from their Banished Zone, is that if they try and do it too much, they have to lose life for that consideration. So Levy is about fueling her Banished Zone. She has some ways, including a transformation, that lets her play cards from her Banished Zone, but most of the time it's about graveyard management for her, and that's kind of a sub-theme of Shadow, is how many cards do I have in my graveyard versus my Banished Zone, and just managing that, especially for Levia, right? Vincent is about playing cards from her Banished Zone, using Rune Gate, so making rune chants, then playing cards from her Banished Zone. She's very much like capable of taking damage to advance her strategy. So for example, every turn she's going to put a card in her Banished Zone to make a rune chant. It's not an optional ability, she has to do it every turn. But by doing that, if that card has Blood Debt and she doesn't pay it, she's going to lose a life at the end of a turn. And her ability also costs her life, so she is willing to damage her own life pool to advance her own strategy. Levia, in a similar way, you know, if she has Blood Debt, she can turn it off with her hero ability. Times are she will choose not to turn it off with her hero ability so that she can have a bigger next turn. So you do have to be willing to a certain extent to damage your own life to advance your final strategy, and that is a theme of Shadow as well. So if you want to build up high value turns, I know a lot of talents are about building up high value turns, but that's what happens when you take a very good rounded concept like a class and you add a talent over it. The talent has to bring the spice. So if you've heard me say a few classes are about building up high value turns, that's part of the reason, is that talents have to bring that high value, because if it's in the base class it never goes away, but if it's in a talent combination it's much easier to control from a balance perspective. If you want to build up combo turns that utilize your Banished Zone and have this non-hand space and kind of feel like you're cheating a little bit, because, you know, Vincent, you've got the card cards in your hand, and then you've got the cards in your banished zone that you can also play. So you might actually have, you know, not just access to 5 cards, but access to 6 or 7 cards in a turn. The same with Levia. So because she uses her graveyard, she can kind of boost her effect above the value of what a normal turn would look like for another hero, and that gives you an extra bit of value, especially if you land some of her power cards like Shadow Realm Horror that let you play a card from your banished zone. You kind of have this non-hand space to draw power from, which is really interesting as a concept. And if you like that, it does kind of feel like cheating. It does kind of feel like you have extra cards available to yourself. Don't play Shadow if you don't like extra zone management. If you're happy controlling your hand, your opponent's cards, your graveyard, and what's on the board, then don't play Shadow. If you don't want to have to separate your banished zone into blood debt, non-blood debt, playable cards, non-playable cards, if you don't want to have to constantly watch, am I taking blood debt damage this turn? How much am I taking? If you don't like unavoidable life loss or situations where you're taking damage from your own cards and you can't stop it, Levia has the unfortunate side effect that she does sometimes die to her own blood debt. And by that, what I mean is, when you get low on life, Levia could have 10 to 12 blood debt cards in her banished zone. That means if she doesn't activate her hero ability, she's taking 12 damage at the end of her turn. Now, if she's low on life and I pressure her with enough damage from my hand that she has to block me with every card in her hand, then she's taking that 12 damage regardless. So your super aggressive opponents who can strip you of the cards in your hand can effectively make it so you kill yourself. And when you add in the fact there are random discard effects, there are effects like New, which force you to block with certain cards, with things like Siren's Call, you can just have the cards you need to turn off blood debt taken away from you with like a Pummel or a Siren's Call. And if that happens, you're not just going to not block the attack well and take some damage from that, but you're also potentially going to die to your own effect. So if you're not willing to have that risk, it's very much a risk in Levia. It's less of a risk in Vincent. She'll lose a couple of points of damage a turn or every couple of turns to blood debt, but Levia could potentially lose a lot of things. And if you're not willing to accept that, then Shadow isn't for you. But there are a lot of payoffs in terms of the banished zone. Vincent especially uses her banished zone very, very well. And then you've got that whole like Shadow Abomination, you know, distorted by shadow gods kind of aesthetic, demons aesthetic, which people like a lot. Moving on then to the last talent on this list, which is Mystic. Mystic is all focused around blue cards matter. It's heavy resource focused gameplay. You'll see that both of these heroes have an ability that costs 3 blue. Blue can only be played by a card that has been transcended. You can only transcend a card, and it's basically taking it out of its sleeve and flipping it, if you have played another blue card the turn that you play the card that transcends. So you have to have a lot of blue cards in your deck. You have to play those blue cards on the right turns. You have to combo the transcend cards together. So you have to want a lot of resources. You have to be willing to play with a lot of resources. You also have to be willing to like look at turns that don't look very good and think, how do I get a lot of value out of that? And what I mean is, like, if I have a 4-card hand full of blues, you kind of have to think, how do I get the maximum value out of this, or am I just taking a turn off and full blocking, right? So there are some hard points where you have a lot of resources and you can't necessarily play all of the cards in your deck. But I will say there is a lot of combo and synergy to make those blue cards valuable, even on turns when they're not great or you don't have a red to play. And whether that's triggering your hero ability with Zen to go and search for something, or using your hero ability or your legendary headpiece in New to force your opponent to banish a card. There's lots of ways to make those turns super effective. So, reasons to play. You want to feel like you can get maximum value from the weakest cards in your deck. If you want to feel like your blues are having impact in the game and actually doing something instead of just being the cards used for resources, then Mystic is for you. Also, just if you like the Chinese... it's Chinese / Japanese, but kind of like more mystical, more like woods and nature and you know, mountains and stuff. If you like that aesthetic, then that is all that Mystic is about. And there's also some fantastic like full art Japanese inspired cards as well that you can get that are just really good. So if you like that aesthetic, then Mystic is for you, and all 3 Mystic heroes embody that aesthetic really well. And if you want to feel like you have these powerful turns where your deck is heavily synergized, that really something Mystic is very, very good at. All the versions of Mystic like really reward you for leaning heavily into the synergy of the talent, whether that's like having a lot of chi and using that to trigger your hero ability, or using it to trigger like super bomb cards, like playing a Manifestations of Mirage. Google that, but it's basically a dragon ward that has 8 attack as a weapon. It's super crazy. Or, you know, using Zen to search for your perfect combo piece and doing a massive turn that started off by playing 2 blues. Like, you can have a turn with Zen where you play a blue, you transcend a card, then you search for a card, and suddenly you've got 12 to 16 damage on the board. Congratulations, you did well. And Nu is just like, well, I'm going to play my opponent's cards by playing this blue, and well, I've already banished 3 good cards from their deck, so I'm just going to play those for free. So there's really good synergy for leaning into Mystic, and it really kind of rewards that. Don't play Mystic if you really like red cards, and that's a bit more nuanced than it feels like. If you want to be playing cards that are consistently above rate and constantly high value, then not necessarily Mystic as a class. You want to play something that's a bit more balanced between red and blue, or a deck that is more aggressive and running like 0 for 4 costed cards. If you don't want to have to set up specific combos and transcends to win the game, it is just a fact that a lot of the Mystic heroes, to actually close and finish the game, have to set up specific combos, whether it's Miragi or the late game sort of Zen combos, or Nu just setting up a lot of cards in your banish zone and then layering them perfectly. There is a lot of thought that goes into getting the maximum value out of a Mystic hero. Not everyone wants to have to set up those things and those transcends. There is also a bit of a swingy gameplay feeling, because if you're playing and you don't manage to transcend cards quickly or easily, you can feel like your hero ability doesn't exist and you don't have a lot of power coming through. So you really do need to get those transcends and see them early. There are 9 you can play per deck, so you do consistently see them, but you do have to focus on it, and some people find that a bit frustrating. So there we go. Thanks for watching. Please do like and subscribe. This is my talent video. There is also a class video that people have really enjoyed that really breaks down all the classes. I do recommend to go and watch that now that you have an understanding, if you haven't already, of the talents are available and the class and the talent combinations. And that's really going to help you pick a hero that not only matches the class playstyle you want, but also the talent playstyle. Just do keep in mind what I said at the start of the video. Go back to that chart, which I'll put a timestamp in for. Not every hero and class combination is available, but that also is probably going to have changed since I made this video in late 2024. So do go and look up before you get too invested, being like, I really just want to play a Mystic Warrior. I want to do it. I want that Japanese aesthetic. I want a samurai feeling on my card in the mountains with all the blue matters and everything, and it doesn't exist. Don't get disappointed. So do go in prepared for your class and talent combination not to exist, and if you find it, that'll be really good. Thanks for listening. If you have suggestions for other videos in this kind of series you'd like to see, I'm just kind of breaking down the core mechanics of Flesh and Blood, as I have done for many years, for new players. We have reviews of heroes, which are suitable for new players on a ranking out of 5 stars. We have reviews of sets, which I'm working on. Again, ranking out of 5 stars, are they good for new players? And we also have a guide to all the keywords in the game, broken down set by set, so that as a new player, you can quickly catch up to what keywords are available. And all those videos are on my channel in the various playlists, hero guide playlist, keyword playlist. Go and dive into them. It should give you all the equipment you need to come and join us on this fantastic journey in the world of Flesh and Blood. As I record this video, I've been playing the game for over 5 years. I have not regretted those decisions. It's been great times. Speak to you all soon, and have a great